I wanted to say something about love because, of course, it's Valentine's Day coming up, and but wanted to have a kind of link with Ollivier, our guest, by talking about courtly love. And I'm getting the hang of this multimedia Zoom image now, and I've got a new background which shows you the image of two courtly lovers there, which I'll talk about. So courtly love, in a way, was the precursor to romantic love, which kicked off really in the 18th century, particularly actually with the rise of secularism. It's rather interesting that I think, broadly speaking, what happened was people felt that they couldn't turn to God for unconditional love anymore, and so felt they had to turn to other human beings for unconditional love, with the inevitable mixed results. But nonetheless, before that was what was known as courtly love. And I think this began all the way back in the 11th century or before, in regions of France like Aquitaine. And the idea in courtly love was somewhat different. And I wanted to offer it to you this Valentine's Day because, you know, Valentine's Day, maybe a bit less this year, but often feels very commercialized, a lot of pressure around romantic love, perhaps too much pressure. And courtly love, to revisit that idea, perhaps opens up what love can do for us once again. Now, it's well known that courtly love was about the erotic charge between a knight and a lady, as you can see in the image behind me there. And the lady was
cock, look.
The lady was beyond reach of the knight, probably married to the lord, and yet in many texts he calls her my lord. And I think the idea is that she becomes for him a kind of spiritual guide to awaken a higher self within him, charged by the passion of love that couldn't be immediately satisfied. And then she gains a sense of the numinous awakened in her by the role that she plays too. So the idea was that this was erotic love, not just looking for satisfaction in another person, but that could reach into higher levels of reality, which the philosophers amongst you will know goes actually all the way back to Plato, if not before, where Socrates in Plato's Symposium describes how the priestess Diotima introduced him into the arts of love, by which is meant the ability not just to see other human beings and love them, not just to see things that are lovely in the world around and about, but to see that which is good, beautiful, and true into what you might call spiritual or divine realms as well. So courtly love was a reinvention of this very ancient tradition, hoping for the greatest things that love can deliver to us. And in the image behind me, you've got not just got the knight and the lady, but you'll notice that their hands are meeting, and at their meeting point there is springing a tree of life, a kind of third reality dimension that grows, that sprouts from their meeting. I think it's also very interesting that they almost look like they're mirroring each other. They become kind of mirrors for each other, and so see in each other into themselves at the same time. So this is, you know, love awakening, not a kind of possessiveness, I must have you and hold you because my life will somehow become complete if I get that. It's awakening this passion to life's current itself. And you see this echoed in a lot of fascinating texts from around this time, this medieval period, right across different cultures, actually. One of the best known remarks made by Rumi is that lovers don't meet, they are already inside one another. Lovers don't meet, they're already inside one another. And to romantic love, to Valentine's Day, that's almost incomprehensible. You know, the whole point is that lovers meet. But no, says Rumi, lovers don't meet, they're already inside each other, because it opens up this third dimension of life itself that erotic love can make us aware of, like the trees springing up from between these two figures here. Probably in the whole of Western literature, the best known example of this is Dante, his Divine Comedy, where Beatrice, his love for Beatrice, leads him all the way into the highest heavens. And actually one of the talks which Victoria just mentioned there that I've put online on the YouTube this week is about Dante and awakening to this highest sense of things through love. So I'll put those in the chat after I've finished if you want to pick those up. But I wanted to offer this to you. You know, look, this Valentine's Day, as we like doing at the Idler, try and rise above the commercialization of romanticism. And if you're on your own, don't worry. Don't let Valentine's Day steal life from you with these aspirations, but turn back to this earlier idea of love. Send a card if you want, of course. But remember that there's a higher self within you that love longs to reveal to you, and that riding that passion can open up what Plato called, of course, nothing less than the good, beautiful, and true. And I think we owe this whole tradition to the French. So I'm going to hand over now to Tom and Ollivier to take things in their lovely direction as well.
Mark, thanks so much. That's a beautiful introduction, and very much in line with the themes in Olivier's book. Ollivier, can we just get you to say hi?
Hi.
Oh, you are there. Great, excellent. The French art of not trying too hard, and in fact, at the beginning, you do talk about seduction, and there's nothing more sort of unsexy in a way than someone who's trying too hard. Do you think the courtly lovers could be accused of trying too hard?
Well, in a way, if you listen to what Mark just said, at first, as some of you, I thought he was talking about courtly love. So I thought he was going to talk about Kurt Cobain. And then I discovered it was courtly love, because my English is a bit rusty now. So, but in fact, if you follow his advice, it means in order to reach a goal, you'd better forget about it. So if you go after someone with too much intensity, you're due to fail. In fact, this is the experience I got. But I heard that for some other people, this is the opposite. And I don't want. I'd like to ask you advice, but I see there's many of you, so maybe we can have some statistical advice. Someone told me it was a really masculine idea, the idea that you'd better not go after your goal to reach it. And I heard that women were very, well, much more efficient, and they really knew what they wanted. So after I wrote that book, I met French people, and some French women told me I had it wrong, that women know what they want, and this is, well, they go after it and they get it. And I had a different approach. So I guess
you somehow hadn't, the fact that you hadn't noticed that they were heading towards their goals with such ferocity kind of shows you that you're right about the French art of not trying too hard, because part of what you're saying, I think, a sort of paradox in the book, is that the French spirit or the French attitude, it's not about not making any effort, it's about not appearing to make a huge effort, and you might be sort of actually working quite hard secretly. Is that fair?
Exactly. And if you want some history about it, at the beginning, my publisher told me, well, you have to explain in what way that would be more French, because I don't think it's only French, but the French have a reputation for not being lazy, but looking easy, or without not making any effort. And so you have to appear lazy because you have to hide work. But in fact, that dates from the 17th century, when we had the 17th, 18th century, when we had kings. And if you are part of the court, you want to pretend that everything is easy and comes easy for you. After the French Revolution, with the 19th century and the industrial bourgeoisie, you suddenly work was the first value, and meritocracy and egalitarianism. So you had to work your way through life, and suddenly work became a value. But before that, you had to appear effortless. In fact, I think that the 20th century made some kind of weird mix between the aristocratic appearance of not making any effort, and the bourgeoisie valuing work, hard work. And we made a mix, you know. We work hard to pretend we don't. And it works pretty well, because I had a chat with you before we started, and you still think that we spend 2 hours or 4 hours for lunch. And in fact, some of us work, in fact, in France, but we hide it.
You hide it very well. I was telling Olivier the story I wrote in my newsletter today that many years ago I had lunch with some friends, with some French businessmen in the north of France, to discuss a business deal, because they were going to make some absinthe for us, which we would sell in the UK. And the first thing we did was have lunch, and this lunch started at about 12:30, and it went on till 2, 3, 4, more brandy, more wine, no conversation about business whatsoever. And then eventually, rather embarrassingly, because I was the editor of the Idler magazine, and was promoting idleness, I said to them, "Don't you think we should do some work?" and they said, "Oh, travailler moins, produire plus." The more you work,
That's a good motto.
the less you produce. And so that reminded me of your book. But you know, I think you can trace back actually very clearly these two traditions in France. And we're obviously fans of the philosophical French tradition, the philosophical stroke aristocratic tradition you were talking about. But in 2017, Macron, I think memorably, I'm going to try and read this in French, but he said, "Je ne céderai rien, ni aux fainéants, ni aux cyniques, ni aux extrêmes." Could you translate that, Olivier, if I read that correctly?
Well, I thought we were going to talk about philosophers, not about politicians.
Well, what I'm saying is, yeah, but what I'm saying is that, you know, the Macron is rebelling against the French spirit of philosophy, and by being bourgeois, essentially, and he's about hard work, utilitarianism.
Yeah, but that dates from the time when he thought that maybe he was, I mean, the master of France, and you don't stay the master of France for a long time. So now I think he has changed his mind. Well, or the world made him change his mind. But you know, what happened to your absinthe business? I was asking you, but it's interesting that you talk about absinthe, because in fact, in France we have a tradition with poets like Rimbaud and Verlaine, and they're supposed to drink absinthe. I don't know what you're drinking right now. It looks
Yeah,
good.
I
And
don't drink absinthe anymore.
it's supposed to make things easier for you, you know, to give you some kind of like a muse. When you're a poet and you drink alcohol, it's supposed to make things easier. And in the book I talk about it, because in fact Rimbaud, he produced all of his poetry, produced a lot before he was 20, and then he stopped, he quit poetry. But he started studying Latin and Greek very early on. So he spent the 10,000 hours, you know, this famous rule of thumb, supposed to make you an expert in any field if you spend enough time. So when he was 17, he was the best pupil in Latin in his high school, and he got a national prize, which is the proof that he didn't come easy for him. He put the hours in, you know.
Yeah, so this is the idea that you really introduced the book with, is the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours idea, which is that more or less he's kind of talking about an apprenticeship, isn't he? Because 10,000 hours would be about sort of 6 or 7 years, I think, given a 40-hour week, which I always thought was not actually a very revolutionary idea. And you're quite ambivalent about the 10,000 hours.
Well, I'm not really ambivalent. When I talk about not trying too hard, it doesn't mean that you don't have to try. It doesn't mean that you don't have to work. It means that you work much more efficiently if you work in a field you love or you dream about. And I'm talking about the sledge dogs. I don't know much about them, but I read a book by David Epstein called the Sports Gene. and he talks about the dogs, and he's asking a dog trainer, how do you make them pull the sledge? And he said, you know what, you can't train them for that. They have to love it, and if they don't love it, they, even if they train, they won't get as good as the ones who love it. So it's very interesting. And there's a guy called Dan, I forgot his last name, an American guy who read Malcolm Gladwell on the rule of 10,000 hours. We've got maybe to explain what it is. Tom, what do you think?
Well, I think most people, yeah, briefly that, he says, well, anyone who ever got good at anything put in 10,000 hours of practice.
Well, it comes from a study by a guy called Erickson, Florida University, I guess. And he made a study with violin players in a Berlin school with very high level, and they made a study about just 30 people, and 10 of them were supposed to become high level, first level soloists. 10 of them would become orchestral musicians, and 10 of them would, well, were teachers to be, and they made 3 categories, and they studied how long they had practiced their instrument, and there was a correlation between the number of hours they had spent and the time, well, the age they had started studying their instrument. But the danger of that is that you may think that if you spend enough time, you become certainly good. And David Epstein goes against that, and he says, for example, in chess, to reach the level of master, some people spend 23,000 hours, and some of them spend 3,000 hours. So you may spend 20 more years to reach the same level. That means that training is not enough. There's something else. So usually you say, when you want, you can reach a goal. I don't know. There's when there is a will, there is a way. I had a friend who kept saying that to me. And in fact, you should reverse it. If there is a way, there may be a will. If you can, then you should make the effort. But some things are not worth spending your effort on. This is what I mean. Life is not just about effort, and life is not just about pain. I see a lot of people trying and striving around me to reach a goal they can't reach. And that's a shame, I think, to make people think that they are guilty of not reaching a goal, because some goals can't be reached. So if you follow this ethics of absolute work, you may waste your time. So I'm not saying you don't have to work. I mean, you have to work with economy, intelligence, and with the nice rhythm. So I take the metaphor of the sea. If you watch the sea, it's not always at a high level. It goes like that. So you have to find some wisdom and some rhythm in your effort, in your life, to give it some balance.
Now, you're a big fan of the ancient Greek philosophers, and there's a lovely passage in the book where you're teaching a girl her philosophy baccalaureate, and she's very worried about this exam that she's taking. And you basically sort of tell her that the worry and the work are not going to help her. What will help her is, as you said earlier, sort of loving the subject and actually really concentrating on the subject, not on the result. And you get a lot of, and you bring Socrates in as proof of that idea.
Well, it's both a true story, and it's something that I use to build a chapter very easily. But it may sound like a philosophy lesson. I was lucky with this student because she started very low level and she ended up with a very good grade at the exam. But my point was, I told her, you know what, the philosophers, they didn't do their work and invented their theories just so you can study them and get an exam. They did it because they had to, as Mark explained. Well, Plato, he didn't do that. He did that for both fun and because he had to do it. So I told her, forget about the exam. It's the best way to understand, because we didn't do it for the exam. And at the end, if you understand, well, you pass your exam. But I thought it's just a way to say, to reach a goal. Maybe sometimes you have to work, but not to be obsessed with the goal. Because if you work with the element itself, there's I know there's a easy English. I think it's English. You wrote the element. You know, if you're in your element, everything seems easier, and you see the meaning of what you do. If you do it only for the exam, there's a lack of meaning. It's just an exterior goal. If you understand it from the inside, then it becomes easier, and you pass your exam without any effort. That was why I told this little story.
What about the streets of Paris? Because what we love about Paris is our idea of, 1950s situationists. We love the idea of Sartre and Camus smoking Gauloises outside Les Deux Magots and that sort of thing. We love, Roland Barthes and Montaigne. There's a long list of people, and you're a big fan of Descartes as well. But what's happening to the philosophical discussion and that sort of street culture in Paris right now? Where is everybody? It must be. I mean, it's bad enough in London, but at least in London we're normally kind of inside. But Paris, life is really kind of lived in cafes, isn't it?
Well, if I remember well, because I used to live in London when I was 60 years old, I was attending the French Lycée, and when I had the opportunity, I would spend some time in the pubs too. So I guess you have a very strong pub culture too. And well, we all suffer, don't we? We need the social space where apparently there's nothing at stake, and we are free to talk, and nobody's gonna tell us what to think, and we miss it. And I think it's difficult to find this freedom in the virtual space. Or I'm happy to well, I can't say I meet you, but I can feel there's a very warm atmosphere between you. I don't know how you made it to build that kind of link, like I can feel the warmth. I'm well in Paris. I hope you don't hear my baby screaming in the back, and I feel there's a sense of community, and this is what we miss. But if you're talking about philosophy, you know what, philosophers is better when they're dead, because else they fight each other, because they don't agree on anything, and they're just a bunch of I won't use the word, but it's better if you don't meet a philosopher. They are arrogant pricks, and they end up president of France. So what I like is the company of easygoing fellows. And I chose Descartes in my book because people have a misconception about him. Every time they have something dull to say, they think that Descartes said it, because the humor of Descartes was hidden, and Descartes' life is really amazing. He was a warrior because he was idle. He was looking for idleness. That at that time, if you were a soldier, you were like a traveler, and there weren't a lot of fights, so you had a very free life. It was before the invention of discipline. And so Descartes was a wanderer. And there's an anecdote in the book I like a lot, where you see that this guy, we think is all about reason, but he had rented a boat in northern Germany, and he spoke German, but the guy didn't know he understood, and he hired 3 mariners, and he heard that they were about to kill him because they saw he was a foreigner. And instead of trying to convince them, you could think that the philosopher is just somebody who's talking and talking. Well, he took out his sword, and he threatened them in their own language. And suddenly was 1 against 3, but they became very, lovely people. They're ready to take care of him. So Descartes was that kind of, he was this guy who said, okay, there's a time for thinking. When you have time to think, you can spend a week thinking about an idea, doing metaphysics, whatever, but you don't have to spend too much time thinking, because life is about acting, making choices, and making choices without knowing in advance. You know, it's not about just um, doing what is reasonable. It's doing even when you don't know what to do. And this is what I learned from Descartes. You know, so I put it in the book because to make things easy. In fact, it's about making a very simple distinction between when it's time to think and when it's time to act. And there's a philosopher I like a lot in the wake of Descartes. His name is Alain, and I talk a lot of him about the book. If you don't want to buy the book, listen. This is a good sum up of what is in the book, and he says there are two words. If you want a good doctrine of action, the first word is continuing, and the second word is starting. And he said the order is important. You know, usually people think they have to start and then continue. He said this is the opposite, because life is always already started. For example, today maybe you joined a conversation. You know, there's always a conversation going on. This is why we enjoy pubs and cafes. You can join a conversation, and it's the same for walking. You know, walking, if you start walking, you don't need to start. You're always like walking, and you need to continue. So there's only one good advice in this book. It says starting is too difficult. Starting is for gods. You know, when you're a god, you can start a world. We are just human beings who are unable to start anything. So we may just continue. You know, do what you're already doing, but do it better. And this is what I like about Descartes. Is in fact, if you listen to him, he's a good friend. You know, he gives you good advice.
Now, tell us a little bit more about Alain, because I hadn't actually heard of Alain before reading your book. When was he writing?
Well, Alain is a philosopher at the beginning of the 20th century, and I like him a lot because he was a pacifist, but when it was time to go for war, well, he went, you know, because he said that the place for a pacifist is fighting with everybody else when you have to. So if you can avoid war, do it. But if you have to do it, go for it. You know, with everybody. And he did it. He was 47 years old in 1914, which means that he didn't have to do it. You know, he was too old to do it. But he was in good health, so he went, and he refused to be an officer. So he fought in the artillery with soldiers 17, 18 years old. And he was a teacher. And every time, I live not far from the place where I used to teach, Lycée Henri IV, behind the Pantheon. Maybe you know this place. And there's something very moving when you go to that place. There's a big monument, big wall with all the names of the students and teachers who died in World War One. And when I pass by, I watch this wall and I see the names of all his students. You know, this guy was the best teacher of the 20th century, the first half. Well, most of his students died in the war. And when he came back from the war, he was angry, and he wrote his memories about the war. And in fact, this is to me a real philosopher, because he was not thinking he was not thinking what he would do if he would become president or king or a leader of men. And he said, I want to stay a simple soldier, you know. And so he put all his intelligence, understanding of life and philosophy to the service of the people, and he started a popular university. So I read him like a guy, you know, always at the service of the common man.
So it sounds like that Alain, for you, he had a lot of humility, in contrast to these like arrogant pricks you were talking about earlier.
Well, you know what? What I like about him is he doesn't look like a philosopher. He had the mustache and he looked like a cavalry officer, and he had some arrogance, confidence, you may say. You know, he looked, he stood proud, and Descartes was the same. He could be a warrior. Was not afraid of thinking with, impetus. I don't know how you would say that, you know, or, the way you start an action, or the way you start something, you have to start with pride, and you can feel it. You know, it's a human being proud of being human. And yeah, he didn't like the university people. I personally, I like university people because I know many of them, and I believe in intellectual work. But what I like about him is that at one point, you have to stand for yourself. You know, you have to love philosophy, and to make it, to believe in it. And when you believe in it, you may act as if you are helped by dead people of, like Socrates, you know. And sometimes you meet a teacher like that. I met one teacher like that, and I thought he was in direct connection with Socrates and Plato and Alain, you know, and it made me love Alain. So it's like a line of individuals that lead you back to the origin of philosophy.
And of course, Socrates had been a hero in the Peloponnesian Wars when he was younger. He was a soldier too, wasn't he, Mark?
Kill
We'll probably come
people.
back to that in a second. But
Yeah.
just to wind up this section, Ollivier, can you talk about Philippe Petit, the tightrope walker? Because I mean, he really embodies what you're talking about: thinking and acting, and walking a
Yeah,
tightrope is a sort of philosophical act.
yeah, it's interesting because it's a tightrope walker, and the first time he made a, what did he do? You know, between the towers of Notre Dame de Paris, he, by night, with a key had stolen, he put a cable and he walked on it, you know, in the morning. And Notre Dame de Paris is just in front of the police, the main police station in Paris. So he was arrested, but not on the cable, of course, when he came back on the ground. And in France, well, nobody really noticed. You know, there was like a few lines in François or whatever. And a few years later, in 1974, he did the same thing, but between the Twin Towers, and suddenly became a huge star. But it was not much more difficult. It was, of course, because it was higher. It was 400 meters high, and it was a 60-meter cable. It was windy. He spent 45 minutes on it, and they sent helicopters to convince him to well, but became a star because, in fact, he answered to an argument that was made by Montaigne, because you talked about him, and by Pascal, and both of them say, if you take the best philosopher in the world, so when Pascal writes that, he thinks about himself, of course, you know, if you take the best philosopher in the world and you put it in a cage, and he says between the towers of Notre Dame, you know, if you hang him there, or if you put between the two towers of Notre Dame, how you call that, a wooden, like a plank, you know,
Yeah.
large enough to walk on it, nobody is wise enough to try that, or to think about it without falling. You know, just thinking about it makes you fall in your imagination. When you imagine, don't do it because you may hurt yourself. You know, don't hurt your imagination because this is priceless. But what I was really amazed by was the ability of Philippe Petit to respond, to answer to Montaigne and Pascal, but not by thinking, just by doing, and by preventing himself from the wind of thought. And he says, if you think on a wire, you fall. And me, you know, I'm an intellectual worker, you may say. And I know that thinking is the enemy. I mean, thinking is at the same time the most beautiful thing we have and we share. And we experiment that too much thinking, overthinking, overanalysis prevents us from living. So it's a weird balance we have to find. You know, when I see a wall of books, like if I watch my library, I think, okay, I won't have time to read all of that before I'm dead. So if I start reading, it's like turning my back on life. So, but if I just act without books, well, it's boring, you know. Life without a book is like life without a glass of beer or wine. I don't know what you're drinking tonight.
What do you? What, by the way,
You
what
have
are
to
you
find a
drinking?
balance, you know.
Sorry, what are you drinking, Ollivier, this evening?
Right now, nothing. I get to sleep too early before the end of this conversation, but I promise you to drink to everybody's health just after we finished.
Okay, that's great. Well, we'll definitely we'll believe you. Now, would you like to come in, Mark? There must be some reflections you'd like to make.
Yeah, well, actually, one
I mean,
thing.
I was thinking. Sorry, but I was just thinking about this idea of the tightrope walker, the chess player. Um, you know, or it could be a tennis player. Let's think about Federer. You know, when they go right to the top, they don't actually work that hard. You know, of course they're practicing all the time, but when you read interviews with Federer, you know, he's playing about 4 hours tennis a day. He has 2 days off a week, and they say, "What do you do at home?" And he says, "I do nothing all day. I just kind of hang around." You know, he doesn't actually work that hard. And there was an English cricketer, Ed West. He said something similar, that, you know, the really top people, the ones right at the top, they know how valuable doing something completely different to their main thing is, or simply doing nothing.
I mean, the only experience that I've had that I think might vaguely be an echo of that is I play the piano, and at one point I was, you know, quite reasonable. I might have done a music degree and stuff like that. And I do remember at that stage, every so often when I learnt a piece really well, it felt like the music kind of took over me rather than me playing the music. And I'm not saying it was a perfect performance or anything, but there was that kind of sense somehow. And the strange thing is, it did require many hours. I mean, I'm completely with Olivier on the whole 10,000 hours thing. I think it's rot, actually, and the psychology is very dodgy, as a lot of psychology is. And I speak as a psychotherapist, because of what's called the replication crisis. But that's a whole another discussion. But nonetheless, you know, there's a funny thing, a kind of flip occurs when you put in all the time, the effort, it somehow becomes part of you, and then more than you can take over. And that's what I sense in someone like Federer as well. It's why he feels like a god. That, you know, it comes from who knows quite where, and that's what's really exciting about it. And I don't know if that's quite what Olivier is talking about as well. But that was my thought when you were talking about that. Olivier, is that the sort
Yeah,
of
Olivier, what do you think about these the really top, you know, chess players and sportsmen and so on?
Well, to start, because I reread my book in English, well translated by Ellen, because we worked a lot about it, on it. In fact, to tell you the truth, I don't like talking about the top people, because what do I know about top player? And we keep, you know, in these books, how to blah blah blah. We keep trying to understand how the top people made it, and in fact, I'm ambivalent about that, because if they are gifted, you know, that means that they reach the top because they are gifted, and or they are geniuses or whatever. And at the same time, if I think they are a genius, why would I even try to do like them? They did nothing else than work at what they love. So Federer, it's interesting because this is an example that David Epstein takes for his new book, Range, and I recommend it to you. It's a very nice book, and it compares Federer with this top golf player. I forgot his name. Very top, like the best in the world ever. What's his name? Tiger Woods. Yeah. And he says, okay, Tiger Woods specialized very early on, like maybe he was 1 year old and he started golf. And Federer, it's the opposite, because he went to tennis very late in his athlete life, and he started with football and blah blah, and with a mix of everything. In the end, he had a wide range of activities, and he made his own way of playing tennis, and he was so good at it. So David Epstein makes a kind of deduction. He says nowadays we should not specialize too early and too much. And he even says that the recent Nobel Prizes were generalists, you know, and people who were interested by many things and who changed their center of interest every 5 or 6 years. And they made connections, you know, between different realms, and this is how they created new ideas. But to take an example that's more common to us, but closer, I think learning a language, you know, is much more interesting because everybody's able to do it, and you don't need to be a top, you know, talker. Me, I know when I was 16 years old and I was living in London in my English family, um, and I was trying very hard to lose my French accent. And after a few months of vainly trying that, they told me, "We love it when you talk because you sound so French." And then I said, okay, forget about losing the French accent. You know, I should not strive that much to get rid of what makes it charming. So, but you know, if I remember well, when I was 16 years old, I did not understand a word on TV. You know, I was living in London and I was watching movies with my English family and not understand. I would understand it, but not that much, like maybe one word every 3 or 4 words. And now, well, after a few years of watching series and movies with subtitles in French, then I moved to subtitles in English. And now I understand even if there are no subtitles. So I'm very happy to understand more. How did that happen? Because I've spent a lot of hours in the element, but I was not forced to do it. It's because I love it, you know. And this is the only morals we should take. The only example is that if you jump inside a language and you make mistakes, and who cares, you know, and then you have a chance to make connections like we are in a virtual pub. I'll drink later, so it's very virtual, but I feel we have a kind of conversation, you know, and it would have been impossible for me when I started. So um, things become easier, you know. Why? Because you spend time in it, not because you count the hours, because you love spending your time there. So build a new habit. And I remember when I was living, I lived in the US too, you know. A friend of mine was an accountant. He had a car, so he was driving me back home every day. I was 25 years old. He was 59, 60. And he was learning Italian, 3 words a day. And I said, okay, do you have Italian friends? It said, not yet, you know? And this is more an example. I love him. His name was Jean, and he used to live in Scotland, and I kept that lesson. This is not Federer, you know, but now I know that if tomorrow I want to start Chinese, I'll think about Jean as my role model. I learn three words a day, maybe just one. At the end of the year, have 365 something, or maybe 3 times that. And I have Chinese friends, maybe one day, but I start with English speaking friends.
So there we have it, the effort-free method of learning a language from
jump in the pool of language.
Jump in the pool. Well, Ollivier, your English is brilliant, and I'm really glad that you still have your French accent because it does sound extremely charming. Victoria, have we got some questions from our audience?
We have. Thank you, Ollivier. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tom. Can we start with that rhythm of work? Angie Burnett, you've got a question on that theme, actually. Are you there, Angie?
Yes.
Will you ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Ollivier. Thank you so much. You talked about having a rhythm.
Hello, Angie. I can't see you. I see just your name.
Angie. We want your video on.
Okay, here I am. And here is Matt.
Hi,
Angie. Wearing matching American shirts. Just moved.
Nice Canadian look, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ollivier. This is super interesting. So the question I had was, you talked about having a rhythm of work, and you talked about the sea, which was a really nice analogy. And my question is, what's your personal rhythm of work? What does that look like for you?
Well, as I have 3 kids, including a baby, my rhythm of work is using the left space, and well, I don't choose the highs and lows, anymore. So, but a good rhythm is because my work is writing. In fact, I give lectures and I write. So when I give a lecture, I try to be not too tired. So if I have the choice between spending 1 extra hour preparing for the work and going to bed, I go to bed now. This is my experience, because it's better to be present and to be awake for the conversation we may have, than to have over prepared and be just tired when it's time to be present. And the second thing is that as I'm trying to write stuff, so I can tell you about the moment when I wrote this book. It was in Greece. It was on my holiday time, and I used the environment to I was in touch with the sea. I love swimming and snorkeling and skin diving, and I practice apnea too. So I was waking up very early in the morning, 6 in the morning in the water, but it was not winter time, of course. And once my body was happy with what he had done, the day was over for the body, and it was time for thinking. But thinking was coming from the pleasure of having used my body inside the element around me. And I was watching what was around me, and there were tomatoes and fig trees. And in fact, Greece is amazing because you feel that everything is at hand, and everything is like, well, there's a lot of generosity from nature, even on the rocks. So the rhythm, the wisdom of rhythm is be as relaxed.
I don't like them too.
Be as relaxed as possible in the effort, not being tense all the time.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've been too long, yes.
No, not too long at all. Does that answer your question, Angie? How does it fit in with your rhythm?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I like to go out for a run before I start work. And I think that's another way of kind of, loosening up the mind a little bit. And I love how Ollivier said that he worked after having worked in the sea, especially linking up with the analogy of the tides coming in and out. And when we were living in the US, just up until the last autumn, we lived right on the beach. And that was always a great place to go and think and sort of reset for the day ahead.
But it's interesting because at the moment, so Angie has a kind of 9-to-5 type job. I've just started writing a book, and our rhythms, we're trying to sort of align our rhythms. I'm trying to work out where, like, I can write in silence, but then if there's a Zoom meeting or something, I can't really concentrate on writing. And so like trying to work out how, we share an office in our home here. So
yeah, throw in a bébé as well now. And
get headphones.
You better be reading
what I'm doing.
Victoria, was that your French, Bebe?
Yeah,
it was. They can speak French. That's amazing.
Oh, I don't know how you all do it. But yeah, start with some exercise as a general. Wish we could all go to Greece, but we're wishing. Let's thank you, Angie. Can we go on to Sarah Sanderson? Are you there, Sarah?
Oh, hi there. It's actually Mark that asked this.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Hi, yeah. I remember working in a bar and a campsite in France in sort of late 1980s, and I shared the bar duties with a local French chap. This was in Normandy, and he used to just casually, as a bit of a joke, he used to call me a hooligan, because of course this was the period when English football fans had a bit of a reputation for tearing up stadiums in foreign lands. And it used to really wind me up, because I used to think of it as just a really lazy stereotype about English people, just because I was male and of a certain age. And the question I wanted to ask was whether French people find it a bit irritating when the likes of us talk about them always wanting to have a 2 or 3 hour lunch. And, you know, is that basically just a lazy stereotype? That's not really been going on for a long time.
Well, naturally, to tell you the truth, I take it as a compliment because I think it's disappearing, and the ability to spend a lot of time at lunch gives you a better rhythm to go back to Angie's remark. You know, people who think that they can work 10, 12 hours in a row. In fact, we have studies and we have testimonies from people that are really creative, including Nobel Prizes, explaining that you can't use your mind at top speed and productivity or whatever more than 4 hours a day. And if it's possible, it's better to cut it in twice 2 hours with maybe a long walk between them. So I think that people spend a lot of time at work, not because they're guilty or just because they have to pretend they are productive all the time. And we all know that if we've all been to school, you know, and we know that our attention span is not that wide. And it's impossible to listen to somebody talking for 2 hours without daydreaming. And you know, this is a philosopher Alain who says that the attention beats like a pulse. You know, so attention is not like a constant light on an object. It's more like a pulse. So and if you respect the rhythm of attention, you have to know how to pretend to be paying attention at moments of dullness and boredom. And if you are part of a meeting, you know what I'm talking about. And attention is like a thunderbolt, you know. It's like a strike, and so you have to know how to rest to allow the thunder to strike at times. And even rowing, you know, you have to relax, and then you have to, or maybe fighters, even, you know, boxers, they're not tense all the time. They put intensity and one punch, and most of the time they are like, you know, mellow, and suddenly they're hard and they hit. So this is more about that, you know. And of course we have to get rid of the cliches, but it's like that. We all cliches for each other.
But it's that's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a real ethic, isn't there, amongst kind of sports psychologists, that it's, you know, 80% perspiration and 20% inspiration. But I think you seem to be suggesting that those percentages might be slightly the wrong way around.
No, in fact, they call it the Matthew effect. You know, I think it's Matthew effect. I'm not good with the Bible. Maybe you help me. This is the part where it says that to those we have shall be given, and to those we don't shall be taken even more. In fact, if you train people of different abilities, the good ones are going to run even faster, and not so good ones, they're going to be better. But in fact, the gap is going to be wider. So you know, what's the point of training if you're in competition? This is why you're right. The psychology of sports, in fact, you better train if you're good. If you're not, you better quit and maybe learn a language, because if you learn a language, you'll make friends, you know. And you don't have to be in a competition. You're doomed to lose.
Yeah, that for me.
Great wisdom, great wisdom. Mark, we're going to have to. I want to squeeze one more person in, so I'm going to move on. Ollivier, if you can stay for one extra minute, I'd like to fit in.
You know what? I can stay longer if you want. I'm happy to be with you.
Well, that's so sweet. I know a lot of people often have to leave, but let's fit in Jim and Jim Holland, and at least have one good answer and one good question from that. Jim.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks, Ollivier. I really appreciate it. It was very interesting today. Hi. So I live in the US, and so we hear a lot of stories with a construct, you know, on television, in movies, etc., with a construct of yeah, somebody starting from very little, putting in very hard work, and then becoming excellent. And these stories can be inspiring on the one hand, but then also sometimes I've noticed that they're used in a negative way, where one can be faulted for not putting in enough hard work, and that can feel very bad. And so I'm just kind of wondering what your take might be on those type of narratives, if that's something that is more US centric, or is that something that has kind of been a narrative throughout history around the world, and whether or not you think those are helpful for inspiring people, or can kind of be a mix of helpful and also not so helpful. Thank you.
Well, I love that question because I'm writing scripts myself, and I translated into French a book written by an American script doctor called John Truby. It's called The Anatomy of Stories. So this is a subject, a conversation we went very deep inside together. And in fact, what's interesting, when you tell the story of a character, you have so what makes you interested in the movie is that something happens to somebody, and so you keep punching your character, and in the end he's supposed to have a self-revelation and change his life, and or maybe just get lost. And if you describe the usual commercial Hollywood movie, somebody going from zero to the top, and this is a success story, and everybody can relate to it, or take it as an horizon. But if you take the really deep, and this is for for teenagers, this is a movies for teenagers. But if you take deep writing, in fact, you see it more in series right now. And it started with HBO, with complex characters, and with characters who have to learn something, not to win but to lose, because this is what happens in your life. You have to learn how to lose, and the best teachers, they teach you how to lose and how to respect the opponent. So if you write movies for teenagers, you may teach them how to lose too. And even Clint Eastwood, for example, it's interesting because when he made a movie like $1 Million Baby, she dies at the end, but she got what she wanted, and it's recognition from strangers because her family was rotten. So this is a deep story, and the best sports stories, even the ones where somebody wins, usually tell you something about learning to turn your back on your family, make it by yourself. Usually there's a deep meaning. And then if you go into real complex stories, it's always a mix, and it gives you more a balance, because winning is for young people. So if you want to write fiction for everybody, don't forget about what's to be lost. It makes your life easier, in fact.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I did not really answer it with the full spectrum it deserved, but thanks for the question.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Ollivier. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your great wisdom.
Well, no, you know what? I have to tell you, I read the book again before this meeting because I was afraid of not understanding your questions. And I'm telling you, in the book, I'm bragging a lot. I keep telling stories about how I did this and that. So please, if you read the book, put that on the side and keep the wisdom I took from others. It's really a collection of pebbles I took on the beach of wisdom, and this is things that are really useful. We use just a few of them today, but most of them are just about finding the right position instead of striving to act. In fact, if you have a problem to solve, you just find comfort, you just sit back and watch the problem resolve itself. I can just sum it up right here, but this is an advice that comes not just from tightrope walkers and champions, but from people like Wittgenstein and from piano players, but at the moment where they are weak, no? When they have a problem, the problem is how to face it, how to let the problem solve itself. You have to love the problem. You have not to be in a hurry. So this is not a book for people who want to produce more and produce more efficiently. It's just about an attitude and how to live more relaxed life. And to be honest with you, I don't like the title of my book. I would get rid of the French part, you know, because it sounds as if the French knew something better than other people. But don't forget, it's just a marketing tool used by my publisher, my French publisher. And in fact, you know, every time you compromise, there's a price to pay. And what I don't like in the book is the compromise I made putting French in the title. So forget about the French bullshit. And the art of not trying too hard is enough, you know. Thank you for your invitation. I was very happy to have this chat with you. It was really fast. I was afraid my sentence were maybe too slow, too difficult to understand, but I enjoyed very much just watching you and trying to talk to you wherever you are in the world. It's amazing, the chat. Hi to everybody.
We're getting lots of comments, and we've really enjoyed listening to you.
Please, if you can send me the comments, I would be happy to read what you wrote.
Yeah, we can send the whole recording.
I was talking, no?
Yeah.
We'll do that for you. We'll do that. Thank you, Ollivier. Thank you so much. And listen, everybody unmute so you can thank Ollivier yourselves.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ollivier.
Bravo, bravo.